Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. During this war in Israel between Israel and Hamas, and let's make it clear that it is between Israel and Hamas and not the Palestinian people, it has increased the threat on the U.S. homeland. And we might say to that, really? Yeah, I think so, because when you think of it, it just makes all kinds of sense that it would raise the level of threat to the U.S. homeland. And one of the things to keep in mind is that we have had an open border for 2.5 years. And just this year alone, you see on the screen, 169 people from the terror watch list were stopped at the southern border in 2023. Where are these people now? Do we know where they are? I think not. I don't think we do know where they are. So is that concerning to people, United States citizens, that people are entering our southern border and may have ill ideas and ideas that are not consistent with being an American or helping this country, but their aim is to hurt this country. And yesterday, as you could see on the screen, Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, he warned the Senate that the terrorism threat is highly elevated during these times. The FBI director, this is according to the New York Times, warned yesterday that Israel-Hamas war had raised the potential for an attack against Americans to a new level and escalated threats against Jews and Muslims in the United States. Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said foreign terrorist organizations had called for violence against Jews after the October 7th terrorist attack by Hamas assailants prompted Israel to besiege and bombard the Gaza Strip, where Hamas is in control. According to Christopher Wray, we assessed that the actions of Hamas and its allies will serve as an inspiration, the likes of which we haven't seen since ISIS launched its so-called caliphate several years ago. Mr. Wray told senators on the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee during a hearing about worldwide threats to the United States. The ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans in the United States to a whole other level. The biggest concerns for the agency is attacks from violent extremists or lone actors in the U.S. inspired by hateful messages and calls to violence. The number of anti-Semitic acts in the United States have been on the rise even before the Israel-Hamas war, led in part by white supremacist propaganda, this is according to the New York Times, and new nationalist groups across the country. But since the attack by Hamas on October 7th, the drumbeat of anti-Semitic threats and acts has drastically increased. Mr. Wray said that the threats have reached a historic level. I would venture to say that is exacerbated, of course, by the open border policy, with the facts that we do not have any idea of who's coming into our country. And we could see even in our own community in New York City, you see the different groups that have been protesting, of course, on college campuses. We've seen large protests on college campuses, Harvard being one of them, Columbia University. Here's the one from Harvard. In fact, Harvard has many people that donate to Harvard had pulled back their money because of these anti-Semitic protests at Harvard University. This isn't unusual for college campuses. College campuses are usually the first people to protest almost anything. So we can expect that. Folks, we're going to go take a deeper dive into this, the threats to the homeland. So hold on to your seat, hold on to your hat. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone. Police off the cuff.
There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Branch by Collider.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Yesterday, FBI Director Christopher Wray spoke in front of the Senate and outlined some of these threats due to the war between Israel and Hamas, the threats that surely can come to the homeland, as it's been called after 9/11, and homeland security, protecting the homeland. And, I had an FBI agent on a couple of weeks ago named Bobby Chacon, real smart guy, a talking head on a lot of the TV stations. And he said this potential threat against the homeland is not going to be defended by the Army or the armed forces. The people that are going to defend us against these threats are going to be the local police, the big city, the police, the NYPDs, the Miamis, the LAs, the Chicagos, the Bostons. These are the police organizations that are going to protect us against these threats. They're out there. They're on the street. They have their ear to the ground. Let's hear what FBI Director Christopher Wray said to the Senate yesterday.
A committee is holding a hearing on what it's calling threats to the homeland. The FBI director began giving his opening statements a short time ago. Play some of that for you.
That what we face and what we're doing to tackle them are always important, but it seems especially well-timed this year with the dangerous implications the very fluid situation in the Middle East has for our homeland security. The reality is that the terrorism threat has been elevated throughout 2023, but the ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans in the United States to a whole nother level. Since the horrific terrorist attacks committed by Hamas against innocent people in Israel a few weeks ago, we've been working around the clock to support our partners there and to protect Americans here at home. We assess that the actions of Hamas and its allies will serve as an inspiration, the likes of which we haven't seen since ISIS launched its so-called caliphate several years ago. In just the past few weeks, multiple foreign terrorist organizations have called for attacks against Americans and the West. Al-Qaeda issued its most specific call to attack the United States in the last 5 years. ISIS urged its followers to target Jewish communities in the United States and Europe. Hezbollah has publicly expressed its support for Hamas and threatened to attack U.S. interests in the Middle East. And we've seen an increase in attacks on U.S. military bases overseas carried out by militia groups backed by Iran. Here in the United States, our most immediate concern is that violent extremists, individuals or small groups, will draw inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks against Americans going about their daily lives. That includes not just homegrown violent extremists inspired by a foreign terrorist organization, but also domestic violent extremists targeting Jewish or Muslim communities. We've already seen that with the individual we arrested last week in Houston, who'd been studying how to build bombs and posted online about his support for killing Jews. and with the tragic killing of a 6-year-old Muslim boy in Illinois in what we're investigating as a federal hate crime. But as I said a few moments ago, on top of the homegrown violent extremist and domestic violent extremist threat, we also cannot and do not discount the possibility that Hamas or another foreign terrorist organization may exploit the current conflict to conduct attacks here on our own soil. We have kept our sights on Hamas and have multiple ongoing investigations into individuals affiliated with that foreign terrorist organization. And while historically our Hamas cases have identified individuals located here who are facilitating and financing Hamas's terrorism overseas, we're continuing to scrutinize our intelligence to assess how the threat may be evolving. But it's not just Hamas. As the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, the Iranians, for instance, have directly or by hiring criminals mounted assassination attempts against dissidents and high-ranking current and former U.S. government officials, including right here on American soil. And along those lines, Hezbollah, Iran's primary strategic partner, has a history of seeding operatives and infrastructure, obtaining money and weapons, and spying in this country going back years. Given that disturbing history, we are keeping a close eye on what impact recent events may have on those groups' intentions here in the United States and how those intentions might evolve. For example, the cyber targeting of American interests and critical infrastructure that we already see conducted by Iran and non-state actors alike, we can expect to get worse if the conflict expands, as will the threat of kinetic attacks. But across the country, in each and every one of the FBI's 56 field offices, we are addressing these threats with a sense of urgency. Among other things, that means working closely with our federal, state, and local partners through our FBI-led Joint Terrorism Task Forces to ensure that together we stay laser-focused on mitigating threats, taking an even closer look at existing investigations and canvassing our sources to improve our intelligence, and then sharing that information with our partners, and doing all we can, working with our partners, to protect all houses of worship and people of all faiths.
All right, so we're going to pull away from the FBI director now, but we are going to sort of keep an eye on the two.
If that report to the Senate is not alarming to you, I don't know what is more alarming. Is the report that, yes, we are under threat right now. Cyber attacks is something that maybe most of us don't consider, but cyber attacks are an extremely important thing. I mean, they can shut down the traffic grid, for example. They could shut down a power grid. They are very effective in waging a war. And as terrorist attacks against us and the homeland, they can be very effective. So having said that, what level of diligence is being raised at the border? So people that have ill intent aren't pouring through our southern border. As I said, I put that little slide up on the screen before. 169 people on the terror watch list came into this country in 2023. My follow-up question to that is, where are they? Do we know where they are? Are we tracking them? The answer probably is no. I find that disturbing. How are we protected? How are we protecting the homeland that is certainly under threat? How are we? And again, concerning. I'm a first responder at 9/11. I'm not. I don't want any applause for that. Myself and all the police officers and all the people that were on the NYP back in 2001, we all responded. We all took those duties very seriously. And we understand in a very real sense that this could happen again. This could absolutely happen again. You know, the coverage also on the Israeli-Hamas war, I find that and I understand what the power of the press is, what their job is, but I find that some stations pour gasoline on the fire by how they report things and what they report. And one of them, of course, is CNN. I'm going to put Wolf Blitzer on, and you watch this and you determine yourself if you're disturbed by this report.
Breaking news here in the Middle East, a massive explosion at the largest refugee camp in Gaza. Joining us now is Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht. He's the international spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to ask you first about this massive blast that we all just saw. We saw the video at the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. Is there anything more you could first of all tell us about how this explosion happened?
Hi, Wolf. Thanks for having me. So we'll be coming out in the next, hopefully, hour with more data, but I can update you now that there was a very senior Hamas commander in that area. Sadly, he was hiding, again, as they do, behind within civilians. And that's all I can say at this point. We're looking into it, and we'll be coming out with more data as we learn what happened there.
So can you confirm it was an Israeli attack that destroyed a big chunk of that Jabalia refugee camp?
Yes, I can. We were focused again on a target, a senior commander, Wolf, and we'll be updating you with more data as the hour moves ahead.
But even if that Hamas commander was there amidst all those Palestinian refugees who are in that Jabalia refugee camp, Israel still went ahead and dropped a bomb there, attempting to kill this Hamas commander, knowing that a lot of innocent civilians, men, women, and children, presumably would be killed. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's not what you're hearing, Wolf. We're focused on this commander, again, who you'll get more data who this man was. Killed many.
Wolf Blitzer, it's called a war, Wolf Blitzer. You know, it's called a war. And because Hamas uses civilians as targets, that's part of this war. And I'm sorry, Wolf Blitzer, that you're taking a side here and you're trying to stir this up. But this is a war. On October 7th, people were slaughtered. Babies were murdered. People were beheaded. Women were raped. Wolf Blitzer.
Many Israelis. We're doing everything we can. It's a very complicated battle space. There could be infrastructure there. There could be tunnels there. We're still looking into it, and we'll give you more data as the hour moves ahead.
But you know that there are a lot of refugees, a lot of innocent civilians, men, women, and children in that refugee camp as well, right?
This is the tragedy of war, Wolf. I mean, as you know, we've been saying for days, move south. Civilians that are not involved with Hamas, please move south.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a little bit more information. You knew there were civilians there. You knew there were refugees.
Yeah, he just said that, Wolf Blitzer. He said he knew they were targeting a Hamas leader. Can you understand this is a war?
All sorts of refugees, but you decided to still drop a bomb on that refugee camp, attempting to kill the Hamas commander. By the way, was he killed?
I can't confirm yet. There'll be more updated. Yes, we know that he was killed. About the civilians there, we're doing everything we can to minimize. I'll say it again. Sadly, they are hiding themselves within civilian population. And again, we are doing this stage by stage, and we're going to go after every one of these terrorists who was involved in that heinous attack on the 7th of October. Wolf.
So, folks, this is, again, war is ugly. It's extremely ugly. Will innocent people be killed? Absolutely. Is this the focus of CNN to show that the IDF has killed civilians? Did the Israel start this war? Absolutely not. I just find it so despicable that this network, CNN, and this man, Wolf Blitzer, is really creating hatred. Really, that's what he's doing, creating hatred against the Israelis for fighting a war that they didn't start. Yes, war is extremely, extremely ugly. Now, getting back to the whole dissertation here is the threats against the homeland. And you heard FBI Director Christopher Wray speaking about it. And you've also seen the response in our country. There's a great many groups that are pro-Palestine, and the Palestinian people, they are not the target of this. Hamas, a terrorist organization that is backed by Iran, they are the target of this. So the Israelis are not hating the Palestinian people. They are hating the people that conducted the attacks on October 7th that targeted civilians. They targeted civilians, didn't they? In a despicable attack that targeted women, children, and families and killed them in their homes, burnt them alive. I didn't hear CNN's reports on that. And then you have in our country, of course, these elitist, spoiled brat kids at Harvard University and many other Ivy League schools, Columbia University being another one. And, we understand, having gone through, myself having worked in New York City, Columbia University is extremely a left-wing university. They wouldn't even allow conservative speakers speak on that campus. And when they did attempt to allow them, students attacked the stage on numerous occasions, and thus not allowing a speaker with a contrary view to the Columbia University narrative speak. And yet, so when they are champions of free speech, they're full of it. They're not really champions. They're champions of free speech that they agree with. All right. So when I see all these students protesting, it's, they really, most of them really don't know what they're talking about. And what we have to always remember is this picture right here. All right. That's a picture of the World Trade Center on fire after a plane hit it. And then what ultimately happened. Both towers struck. Almost 3,000 people were killed that day in the World Trade Centers, both buildings. And we can never, ever allow something like that to occur again. And we have to be diligent. And when the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, goes in front of the Senate and outlines the number of threats that we have, let's take it seriously. And the old adage, if you see something, say something, it applies doubly here, because there is definitely threats right now. Our country has not been secured in the last couple of years with these open borders, with people just pouring through the border, unvetted. And then when something happens, everyone's going to be surprised. Oh, how did that happen? How did it happen? How did it not happen sooner? I want to play a little bit of this from Fox News. Heightened fears of another 9/11 on the horizon.
To that moment than we were even on September 10th.
So, Dana, we really have always worried about the Hezbollah presence in Central and South America. Remember, in 1992, they committed the bombing against a Jewish site in Argentina. They've always had a presence. And so when you see the rise of illegal immigration across the southern border, that's part of what Director Wray is talking about. The other piece of that is, with what's going on in the Middle East, these groups use these images, this propaganda, to inspire others who might either cross our southern border or already be here to pull off an attack. Anything from a sort of what we used to call a lone wolf, an individual inspired, to a group. And so with the Iranian calls for it, with the terror groups' call for attacks against Americans, and with the increased attacks against our forces, 28 attacks against our forces overseas by Iranians, we should be worried that there could be another attack here at home.
Listen to Admiral Kirby and Peter Doocy yesterday at the White House.
Has the White House considered the possibility that a terrorist could be in the country right now after crossing the southern border?
Peter, we are always concerned about the potential presence on U.S. soil of terrorists coming from overseas.
You know, it's very thin to say, yes, we're always concerned, but yet we're doing nothing about it. They're pouring through the borders, but we're so concerned. No, you're not concerned. If you were concerned, you would close the damn border. And I find this hilarious, and it's not funny, but when they say, oh, we're concerned, well, do something about it. As an American citizen, we all are being put at great risk because of the incompetence here. It's just outrageous.
Is it possible that somebody who wants to commit a terrorist attack during a time of elevated threat crossed the southern border into the United States already?
I couldn't possibly answer that question, Peter. All I can do is tell you that we have remained vigilant to that potential threat.
Well, and you'd have to be, right? Because here, look at these numbers. Released into the United States after crossing illegally, 900,000, a total of 2 million. Okay, so we have that number. And then on the terror watch list, suspects caught at the southern border in fiscal year 23 alone, 169. We do know that many are coming from Venezuela. Mm-hmm. We also know, as you just explained, that Hezbollah has a presence in South America, including Venezuela.
Yes, that's right. And they've established this presence over a long period of time. I mentioned Venezuela, Argentina, and we work with our allies throughout the region. But when you see this mass influx across our border, you realize how difficult it is to sort out who may be the biggest threats and who are just crossing their economic migrants.
If you put your old hat back on, Homeland Security Advisor, what would be the top 3 things you would say we have to do right now?
So first, you've got to work with state and locals. We have the best police department there is in the country here in New York, but you have to give state and locals as much intelligence as they can to focus their resources. I do think you have to talk to local synagogues and Jewish centers to increase their own security, and that's happening here in New York, all over the city. And I think we have to be honest about talking about it. I think we have to be honest about the problem at the southern border. We have to really understand who are these more than 160 those on the terror watch list.
You're on the terror watch list
Right.
for a reason.
Right. And we ought to know where every single one of them are and be able to account for them. But
Right.
we don't. That's right.
Grant Townsend, thank you for being on with us today.
Thanks, Dan.
So again, folks, how does that make you feel that these people have crossed 169 in fiscal year 2023? 169 that are on the terror watch list have just disappeared into our country. They have no clue where they are, but yet they're very concerned with it. If you were so concerned, you would have stopped them. You would have turned them around and sent them back to where they came from. So how is it that you're very concerned about it? I have a real problem with that. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. And if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel membership with, count them, 5 different levels. And you see the folks in the green font. They're part of our YouTube friends, our family, and we really appreciate everything that they do for us, how they help us. And again, this is from a police perspective, and we give it to you the way that we see it, from a police perspective. Because as Bobby Chacon said, FBI agent Bobby Chacon, the terrorism war in this country is going to be fought by the local police, the NYPDs, the LAPDs, the Miami PDs, the Chicago PDs, all right? The Boston police departments. These police departments are on the ground. They're the ones dealing with these protesters. They're the ones being attacked in some cases by these protesters, who you can see on the screen here. Pretty much daily protests. And the police are the ones that enable that level of free speech to be practiced within this country. And without the police on these scenes of these protests, there could not be protest. There could not be what we refer to as peaceful protests, which is a cornerstone of our democracy. And the police are the ones that enable this. And without the police, let's not forget, there would be no protest like this. And that, therefore, the police are the arbiters of protecting free speech across this country so that people can speak their mind and people can protest.
Which I think is most pertinent right now with regards to protecting our Jewish citizens.
This is Senator Mitt Romney.
And I looked to Commissioner Wray, Director Wray at the FBI, and asked, of the attacks of a religious nature, you said some 60% are directed towards Jews in this country. Is that right?
I did, and that's before, those are estimates or statistics that are before this conflict began.
Oh, so it's probably gone up since then.
I would expect that, but we don't have good numbers yet because it's so fresh. But I think that the point that I was trying to make there, which I really think Americans need to understand, is how wildly disproportionate, if you could ever use a word like proportionate in something like this, that is. 2.4% of the American public, 60% of religious-based hate crimes. They're getting it from racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, ISIS-inspired violent extremists, foreign terrorist organizations, whether they be Sunni like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, or Shia like Hezbollah. And so this is a group that has the outrageous distinction of being uniquely targeted, and they need our help.
What proportion of these hate crimes has been directed towards Muslims, for instance? If 60% were towards Jews, what percent towards Muslims?
I don't have that percentage, but it's obviously quite a bit smaller than 60% by definition.
And you attribute that attack on Jews to these hate groups, I presume, these terrorist groups and hate groups that focus on Jews. Is that right?
Well, yes, but they cover, of course, they cover the waterfront, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. They unfortunately have the distinction of being targeted by every group.
How do they communicate their directions to attack? What's their vehicle for getting that out? Certainly not in the New York Times and not on NBC. How do they get their message out?
Well, social media plays a huge part of it, just like it does messaging on almost everything these days.
Can you take action, or do you take action to try and eliminate, to the extent possible, or reduce the access these groups have through social media? Is there a way of doing that, or is it like, no, there's so many different dark web and other vehicles that their message gets out whether or not we try and interdict it?
There are instances where foreign terrorist activity in the world of propaganda crosses into the material support to terrorism, to a foreign terrorist organization space. But now you're getting into a legal area that I'm not the expert on. What we really need is people, eyes and ears in the community, people letting us know when they see something of concern, so that law enforcement can take appropriate action. And that's why we spend so much time engaged in outreach to state and local law enforcement as a force multiplier, to the faith-based community as a force multiplier in effect, and to the private sector. People sometimes overlook that piece, but some guy goes into Home Depot and wants to buy a bunch of ball bearings and fertilizer and doesn't seem to know anything about what either one could be used for. We want the guy in Home Depot calling law enforcement saying something's off.
Well, I deeply appreciate the work that your 37,000 employees of the FBI do to try and keep our homeland safe, and have done so remarkably well despite this level of threat. I would at the same time look to see if there's not something we can do. I understand we don't want to interdict constitutionally protected speech, but what is constitutionally protected speech? Certainly foreign agents don't have constitutionally protected speech because they're not subject to our Constitution. I presume bots don't have constitutionally protected speech. American citizens do. But even then, citizens offer various forms of hate. And I don't know how you make the assessment of how you reduce the communication of hate across our social media that's clearly leading to the level of attacks that are being perpetrated against people of faith, and particularly Jews.
Well, there is a role for different parts of society in dealing with the issue. Where the FBI fits in is dealing with violence and threats of violence. And when it crosses into that line, it doesn't matter what you're ticked off about or who you're ticked off at. That's a line you don't get to cross in our system, and that's where the FBI kicks into action.
You know, folks, that becomes another huge issue is, of course, the internet and what is free speech and what is hate speech. And who gets to censor and determine what is free speech and what is hate speech? Because it can be the censor that doesn't like what's being said that can just censor someone for speech that they find apparent and not necessarily hate speech. Many areas of the internet, like I'm sure many of you are on Facebook. Facebook could put you in Facebook jail just because they disagree with what you've said. And it may not be hate speech, but they politically disagree with it. So they cut you off and they put you in Facebook jail. Twitter was doing the same thing. I don't know. I don't use Twitter enough to say that for sure. But before the current owner of Twitter, which is now it's called X, Elon Musk, 90% of Twitter were Democrats. 90%. So anything that they found was against their ideology, they just censored it. So again, when we talk about free speech and hate speech, who are the arbiters of what's free and what's hatred, and who's going to cut it off? Marge, thank you so much for your $10 super sticker. Bless the New York City Police Department. You know, Marge, I say that every day because I see my current brothers and sisters on the NYPD. And to tell you the truth, they have it much more difficult than I've had it. The tide has gone so far to the left that they are not protected. They go into riots without helmets on. They're not backed up by the politicians. So, Marge, I appreciate that so much. And again, I appreciate all of the current NYPD officers, male and female officers, detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, inspectors, deputy inspectors, chiefs, all the way up to the police commissioner. They have a very, very difficult job. And the number one target in this world for a terrorist attack is New York City. New York City is the number one target. And let's never forget what happened on 9/11. And that image will always be stuck in my mind. And that little limerick, if you see something, say something, is so important because it will be a civilian that will warn law enforcement of some nefarious activity. It will be a civilian that winds up saving thousands of lives through their reporting of something. If you see something, say something. So important. And when you have the FBI director, Christopher Wray, warning that there's a terrorism threat, you know, and I said early on in the show, duh, like it only makes sense. Of course, there's an elevated terrorism threat. Look what's going on in the world. Look in our own country. Look at the students of some of these universities. There we have Harvard, you know, Harvard University. Cornell University, a student there was just arrested for making threats against Jewish students, just arrested for hate speech and actually threatening the lives, threatening to shoot or stab Jewish students. So these threats are very, very, very real. And no matter which side they come from, if they come from someone being anti-Semitic and they need to be arrested. Same thing if someone kills a Muslim for no reason but hatred, that needs to be addressed. This cannot be tolerated. And it's just a bad situation. And again, you see something, say something. It's so important.
Director of National Counterterrorism Center are all expected to testify before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. In opening statements, FBI Director Chris Wray warned that the Israel-Hamas war could fuel a rise in threats here at home.
Since the horrific terrorist attacks committed by Hamas against innocent people in Israel a few weeks ago, we've been working around the clock to support our partners there and to protect Americans here at home. We assess that the actions of Hamas and its allies will serve as an inspiration, the likes of which we haven't seen since ISIS launched its so-called caliphate several years ago.
For more, let's bring in ABC News contributor and counterterrorism expert Elizabeth Newman, ABC News contributor and former FBI agent Brad Garrett, as well as our Justice Department reporter Alex Mallon. Elizabeth, how does the Israel-Hamas war factor into the current threat environment here at home?
Look, we've already been at an all-time high for anti-Semitic hate. It's been on the uptrend for about 10 years. The people that keep records on this sort of thing go back all the way to the 1970s, and we've never seen anything this high. October 7th was a triggering moment, and the spike that we have seen in online rhetoric as well as offline in real life violence and hate crimes and intimidation tactics, it literally is off the charts at this point. It is a very volatile, intense environment. And I think what you just heard FBI Director Wray say is actually quite chilling, that this environment he sees a similarity to what happened when ISIS declared its caliphate and inspired people to commit attacks. If we were to see something similar, what he's basically telegraphing is that they're concerned that we might see a spate of terrorist attacks here in the United States and in friendly countries around the globe.
Brad, how is law enforcement positioning itself to respond to this heightened threat environment?
So it becomes very difficult from the reality of so many different pieces of intelligence or information from individuals, from intercepts, from a variety of directions as to what's fact, what's fantasy, who's actually going to move on something. So you've got to be quick on sorting out some of these leads to see if, in fact, they take you anywhere. And you have to be careful not to get overwhelmed with numbers. So it's kind of, from the FBI standpoint, the number one thing I'm sure they're dealing with day in and day out. But I still contend the issue is going to be lone actors. And lone actors, as we've talked about multiple times, are sometimes the most difficult to figure out what they're going to do until they do it.
And Alex, what are some of the other major domestic threats the Department of Justice is monitoring right now?
Well, I think one of the things that FBI Director Wray highlighted was, I mean, of course, with what's going on with the Israel-Hamas war, was their concern that cyber actors could also be activated in places like Iran or other foreign nation states who want to take advantage of this situation. So they want to put Americans on notice to be ever diligent about protecting their personal information, their cyber resilience, to make sure that they're not going to be exploited via things like ransomware attacks. That's another one of the things that they highlighted. And I think another thing that they'll likely be pressed on is the crisis at the southern border. Obviously, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is there, and he's going to be pressed on the surge of migrants at the border. And I think Republicans are likely to express concern about the potential that maybe Hamas terrorists or individuals who might be inspired to commit terrorist attacks in the U.S. are part of that group of that's surging across the border. And I think that that's another thing that the FBI Director Wray was highlighting and saying that they're in contact with constant contact with field offices across the country to ensure that they're monitoring all these lone actors who might be activated. And he also highlighted the fact that it's not just isolated to the threats against the Jewish community. Obviously, we saw that horrific stabbing of that young Muslim boy. That's another thing that FBI Director Wray highlighted in his remarks. He said that it's not just isolated to threats against the Jewish community. The Muslim community and Arab communities should also be on alert at this moment.
All right, Elizabeth Newman, Brad Garrett, and Alex Mallon, thank you all.
So, diligence, unsolved crimes uncovered. I think there are likely sleeper cell groups here and waiting to activate. The borders being opened has made this so easy. Unsolved crimes uncovered. I absolutely 100% agree with you. After the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, I know many people don't even remember that because it was sort of eclipsed by what happened in 9/11. I believe that is when, and perhaps even prior to that, the NYPD partnered up with the FBI and started the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And we used to hear a lot about chatter on the internet. Chatter being terrorists speaking to each other on the internet. And of course, cyber analysts, not the regular Facebook users or regular internet surfers, cyber analysts would recognize this chatter and see that or predict that something was about to occur and read into that. In the same way that you guys on the street, if you see something, say something. Someone had just asked, what should we do? Well, use your eyes, your ears. You hear something that's out of the ordinary. You see something out of the ordinary. Call it in, you know. I mean, I think Christopher Wray said something, or excuse me, Christopher Wray said something to Mitt Romney. If you see someone going to a Home Depot, you know, and buy ball bearings, you know, thousands of ball bearings and fertilizer. I don't even know if you can buy fertilizer at a Home Depot. I've never seen them sell fertilizer, but that was his point. Fertilizer can be used to make a huge bomb, which they did. Timothy McVeigh, a domestic terrorist that used that to take down a building. And it was ball bearings was the shrapnel inside these bombs. So as I said, I don't think you're buying fertilizer in a Home Depot, but you get the point. Anyone that would work in a place that sells fertilizer, if someone comes in and buys 2,000-3,000 pounds, that should be reported to law enforcement because their intentions may be nefarious. And the old, if you see something, say something, certainly applies during that situation like that. And so on the street, if you see people talking, traveling, cab drivers, anyone that's their behavior, look, their biggest concern right now are what they call lone wolves. And what weapon has been used in this country that's not a firearm? A motor vehicle. That happened in Manhattan, where a guy in a U-Haul mowed down, I forget the number of people, 13 or 14 people, killing them down near in Battery Park area, near the West Side Highway. So these lone wolf attacks are very real. And those are the ones, if someone's living near you and they're acting strangely, you see their behavior that you can tell has changed. Pick up the phone and call somebody. As I said, these are the attacks and the attackers that they're most concerned with. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for a great attorney in the New York City metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer who became an attorney, and he's doing an outstanding job. You can reach Joe on his cell phone at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe an outstanding defense attorney, he's a great guy, and he's a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. And he used to be on this show a great deal of time, but he's so busy that he hasn't had the opportunity to come on this show again. TN, see something, say something isn't enough. Learn the religions involved. Read the Torah, read the Quran, read the Hadiths. Learn what these folks believe, and you'll understand where the threat lies. TN, great suggestion. knowing things, education gives you power, right? Absolutely. It's so important. But, the whole adage, see something, say something, I think is important. Cynthia Beverforden, I hope I pronounced that right. I have bought fertilizer at Lowe's. I'm not sure about the type that can be used for an explosive. I don't know. I think fertilizer, and I think you could use it. I think it takes a great deal of it to make an explosive. But these people, that's why the FBI also monitors the internet. See what people that are suspects or under suspicion, see what their internet habits are, see what they're searching, see who they're hanging with, see where they're going on the internet. And a lot of times that gives up these would-be lone wolf type predators out there. Tina Bunt, I think it's all connected with the war in Ukraine, Russia, and Iran. And sadly, this is probably just the beginning. Tina, you're very wise. Of course, Iran is the money behind this. And you would think that perhaps our government would hit Iran with some sanctions. It's really troubling that they don't. I don't know if we know all the information from the inside, but to me, that's troubling that they don't sanction Iran for backing Hamas. I think it's pretty outrageous. Seashells Prosperity, hello. I recently heard of a young man who went to a place and said, "I'm not a killer." OCUID, they be bullied because some issue caused threats of such. Seashells Prosperity, I'm not sure what you actually meant by that, but unsolved crimes, yes, we are funding them. It's awful. It absolutely is awful. And again, we don't know the inside politics to all of this, but it's very disconcerting, absolutely disconcerting. So, folks, that is our show for today. I want to thank everyone for listening. I think this is probably one of the most important topics we can cover in real crime, true crime. But this sort of puts everything else on the back burner because this is a worldwide situation that's scary, And again, we never want to see this, what's on the screen, the World Trade Center attacked again. We don't ever want to see our homeland attacked. And could it happen here? Absolutely. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a great day and be safe.
One episode just ain't enough.